She tore through my wheat field daily like she owned the place, boots crunching through the stalks, posing like she was in some fashion magazine, phone in hand, streaming live for her followers. I'd been watching from the porch, biting my tongue, the kind of restraint you learn from years of working the land where patience isn't optional, it's survival. First time, I let it go. Maybe she was lost. Second time, I shouted from the edge of the field. She just laughed, waved her hand like I was some amusement. By the fourth time, I realized it wasn't ignorance, it was arrogance. That field wasn't just dirt and grain to me. That wheat was generations deep, planted by my grandfather, tended by my father, and now mine to keep alive. Every stalk broken felt like a slap across my family's face. But she didn't see that. To her, it was golden wallpaper, a background prop for her next viral dance, another attempt to keep those likes rolling in. She didn't care about land, legacy, or livelihood. She cared about applause from strangers who didn't know wheat from wild grass. The first real insult came not from her boots, but from her followers. "Look at the angry farmer," they wrote. "Old man yells at cloud." Memes started popping up with my face, distorted, eyes bugging out, drool photoshopped on my chin like I was some madman. They didn't know me, didn't care. I became content for them, something to laugh at between scrolling cat videos and political rant. Thing is, I've never been one for revenge. But there's a difference between revenge and self-respect. And I wasn't going to let her make a mockery of my family's work anymore. I sent her a message the old-fashioned way, posted signs around the perimeter, private property, big and bold, plain as daylight. I even mailed her directly, polite and firm. No threats, just words. I tried to meet the modern world halfway. But respect don't trend like drama does, and she chose drama. It wasn't long before she escalated. Streams where she'd deliberately jumped the fence, calling me out by name. "Come stop me, old man wheat," she mocked, blowing kisses into her phone. Her followers egged her on, sending donations, laughing hysterically when she crushed young wheat under her heels. To them, it was hilarious. To me, it was vandalism of something sacred. The problem wasn't just her anymore. It was what she represented. People think farmers are backward, slow, toothless. They see dirt on your boots and call it ignorance, but they don't know the calculus running behind every harvest. Timing, weather patterns, soil acidity, pest control, machinery maintenance, all running like 1,000 gears in the back of your mind every day. To them, we're hayseeds. To us, they're arrogant parasites living on food grown by people they mock. The thing is, I could have gone legal, but I knew how that played. Court fees. Media twisting it into some Goliath versus influencer sob story. No, I needed something older, simpler, and fair. Goliath. I'd raised that bull since he was a calf, bred for muscle, smarter than most city people assumed. He wasn't wild, just particular. Didn't like strangers. Especially ones shouting into devices that lit up like angry eyes in the night. He weighed over a ton and moved like thunder bottled in hide and horn. He was the old blood of this land, the symbol of why you didn't walk where you weren't welcome. I gave one last warning before unleashing him, not because I feared her, but because that's who I am. I believe in second chances, maybe too much. She mocked the warning on her feed, laughing, calling it Old Man Wheat's last stand. Her followers dared me to act. They didn't understand that rural folk don't bluff. We don't bark unless we're ready to bite. Next morning, I unlatched the pen and let Goliath wander the field. He didn't need guidance. Bulls know their territory. They know when it's been trespassed. The field belonged to him as much as it did to me, and he moved through it like a judge passing sentence. It didn't take long. Her squeals echoed across the field, shrill and panicked, the exact opposite of the poised, curated image she projected online. The feed cut off mid-run, static and blurred shots of flailing limbs and stalks whipping past the lens. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not out of cruelty, but because something natural had finally interrupted something artificial. But I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't going to end with a frightened influencer learning her lesson. The war wasn't with her alone. It was with the millions behind those screens, the ones who believed the world owed them whatever made them feel important. And already, the backlash was forming. Violent farmer attacks woman, one post read. Animal cruelty, another cried, though they couldn't decide if they were more offended by me or by Goliath. Videos spliced the incident with sad music, painting her as a victim, turning my justified defense into a narrative of oppression. I wasn't scared of them, but I was wary. These were people who thought hashtags could replace hard work, that retweets could stand in for responsibility. But I wasn't about to roll over because a mob decided I was their next punchline. Respect wasn't trending, but it mattered more than liked. And that beast bull, they hadn't seen anything yet. Goliath wasn't just a bull. He was a force of nature bred for storms. His bloodline went back to beasts used for pulling cannons in wars before machines took over. Massive shoulders, thick neck like a living battering ram, eyes black as midnight with a steady, calculating glare. Not wild, not stupid, not vicious, just territorial. He understood what was his, and that wheat field was part of his world, just as much as the barn or the water trough. I didn't need to train him to charge. Disrespect did that for me. The girl didn't get it. She thought this was just some rustic show I was putting on, an act for a stubborn old man clinging to his dusty past. To her, I was a costume, a character from a movie, not a person with calloused hands and scars from barbed wire and tractor engines. She stood out there again the next afternoon, sunglasses catching the light, hair dyed some unnatural shade of pastel blue, phone balanced in her palm like a conductor's baton. She was already live, already milking her followers for donations with her usual smirks and winks, asking them if they wanted to see her harvest the old man's pride. They thought this was content. I thought this was the last straw. I didn't yell. I didn't wave my arms or curse her out. I simply opened the latch on Goliath's gate and stepped aside. The beast didn't explode from the pen like some movie monster. No drama, no dust clouds. He stepped out like royalty returning to his throne, hooves pressing deep into the soil, muscles rippling with each slow, deliberate step. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. That was what got her attention first. Not noise, but silence, the kind of silence that presses on your chest like weight. She turned, expecting me with another empty threat, but what she saw was something ancient. Goliath was moving toward her now, closing the gap between fence and field, and there was nothing digital about it. No filters. No edits. Just muscle, horn, and earthbound judgment. The scream that followed wasn't theatrical. It wasn't the fake gasp for followers or playful shriek for dramatic effect. It was real, raw, and desperate. Phones don't save you when you've stepped into the path of something that doesn't care about hashtags. She ran, not gracefully, not for the camera, just pure instinct, limbs flailing, boots sinking into the soft dirt where she'd stomped down my livelihood day after day for amusement. Goliath didn't even break stride. He wasn't chasing her. He was reclaiming what was his. The fence that had been an invitation to her ego was now a prison trapping her inside with a judge that didn't need a gavel. Her followers got their wish. They saw raw panic, the camera bobbing wildly, flashes of wheat, arms flailing, sky tumbling sideways as she stumbled face first into a rut and scrambled up, breath ragged, hair full of broken stalks. It wasn't glamorous anymore. It was survival, stripped of filters, exposed by the very technology that had built her little kingdom of likes. But it didn't stop there. The video, of course, went viral far faster than I expected. Before evening, news outlets picked it up. The headlines were predictable. Influencer attacked by farmer's wild animal. Outrage poured in from people who'd never been within spitting distance of a wheat field. They didn't know the smell of fresh soil or the feeling of a summer wind rolling over grain like ripples on water. But they knew outrage, and they weaponized it instantly. Hashtags started flooding in. Justice for Maya trended globally within hours. Talking heads on every major channel speculated on how rural farmers were hostile toward progressive voices, how old men like me represented the dying breath of a world resisting the future. They showed cropped photos of me, frames from her videos designed to catch me mid-yell, mouth open, face twisted, making me look feral, dangerous, prehistoric. They never showed the signs. They never showed the polite letters. Just the madman and his beast. But as much hate as I received, something else started stirring underneath all that noise. Not everyone was buying it. Farmers from every stretch of the country, from tiny operations to massive agricultural corporations, started posting their own stories. Photos of trespassers trampling crops, of influencers treating private land like a backdrop for vanity. Stories of threats, lawsuits, even assaults by people thinking farmland was public property the moment it looked pretty on a screen. I wasn't alone anymore. My frustration had a chorus now, 1,000 voices deep, and growing louder. It wasn't just rural folk either. Veterans chimed in, talking about discipline and respect, about the lost art of knowing your place and understanding that not every fence is meant to be jumped for a laugh. Families shared pictures of their grandparents' farms being lost to developers, to highways, to influencers who thought they were above consequence. What started as a joke became a movement. Still, the influencer didn't back down. She doubled down, posting teary videos of herself, rehearsed just enough to look raw but polished enough to be strategic. "I didn't know," she sobbed into the lens, mascara dripping like ink bleeding from a broken pen. "I didn't mean to make anyone feel unsafe. I was just trying to be creative. I was just trying to share beauty." Donations poured into her account. Sympathy overflowed from people desperate to believe their heroes were misunderstood artists rather than arrogant opportunists. And yet, with every donation she gained, another farmer added their voice to mine. We weren't coordinated. We weren't a political party or a movement yet. We were just tired of being laughed at, tired of watching the work of generations get trampled under someone else's ego trip. It wasn't about wheat anymore. It wasn't even about her anymore. It was about respect, what it meant, how it had been cheapened by screens and signals and empty hearts pretending to be full. They called us backward. They called us relics. But we were the ones who fed them, clothed them, gave them the ground they stood on. Goliath went back to his pen later that evening, calm, chewing cud like nothing had happened. That's the difference between beasts and people. Beasts don't lie to themselves about what they are. Goliath didn't chase fame or followers. He didn't need likes to know his worth. The funny thing is, they thought unleashing the beast was the act of a bitter man. They didn't understand that I wasn't the one who unleashed it. They did. Every insult, every trespass, every mockery of honest work and quiet dignity, that's what unleashed the beast. And the field, trampled and bent, would grow again. Wheat always does. But what about them? Could they grow back after this? That part, I wasn't so sure about anymore. I knew the backlash wouldn't stay digital for long. It never does. The world's too small now, too connected, too hungry for division. By the time the third video of her running through the wheat hit 1 million views, the threats started. Emails, messages, letters scrawled by hand like I was dealing with 2 centuries at once, digital mobs and old-school cranks sending hate by post. Some wanted me dead. Some just wanted me ruined. Property damage, lawsuits, media storms. They didn't care how they came for me, only that I suffered publicly for breaking their fantasy. The influencer wasn't a person to them anymore. She was a symbol. And symbols are powerful currency when outrage is the product everyone's buying. What they didn't realize is that men like me don't break the way they think. I've stood through droughts that killed everything green for 3 counties. I've worked through winters where the pipes froze solid, livestock dropping dead around me while I fought frostbite in my own bones. I've buried family with my bare hands because the snow was too thick to get the hearse up the road. And yet they thought hashtags could finish me? Likes don't pay for tractor fuel. Shares don't mend broken fences. An outrage doesn't plow fields or deliver calves in the dark at 4 in the morning, while coyotes howl from the treeline. They underestimated not just me, but every man and woman who's ever built something with their hands and fought to keep it standing against the lazy hunger of people who take but never give back. And I wasn't going to be another story of a farmer folded under modern noise. They wanted a villain? Fine. But I was going to show them exactly what it means to be one when all you've done is defend what's yours. Reporters showed up next, of course. First the local outlets, then the national ones. Microphones poked at my face like spears, cameras with glass eyes staring as if they could extract guilt with the right angle or enough awkward silence. "Why didn't you stop the animal sooner?" they asked. "Do you think your response was proportionate? What would you say to your critics who call this barbaric?" Not a single one of them asked how many letters I wrote, how many signs I posted, how many fences I mended after she snapped boards under those influencer boot. Not one of them asked how it feels to watch your family's livelihood become someone's joke on a global stage. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a villainous farmer in overalls with a southern drawl saying something stupid so they could splice it into a TikTok clip. But I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. I spoke plainly like my father taught me. No theatrics, no shouting, just the facts. Private property. Trespassing. Ignoring warnings. Natural consequences. But in a world where image beats honesty, I was losing ground fast. They called me cruel. They said I endangered a helpless woman. They ignored the footage of her kicking stalks, mocking my warnings, laughing at the posted signs. Victimhood sells better than accountability. Then the corporations got involved. One of the brands she endorsed released a statement condemning me, full of soft language pretending to care about both sides while clearly choosing hers. They didn't want controversy connected to their logo. Didn't matter that she was wrong. They were in the business of pleasant fiction, and my face didn't fit the script they wanted. But what none of them expected was the resistance building behind the scenes. Other farmers, ranchers, orchard owners, fishermen, all the people modern society forgets until their grocery shelves go empty, started organizing. Posts flooded social media showing crop destruction from influencers, stories about bloggers ignoring boundaries, TikToks of entire harvests ruined by someone needing a cool shot for their feed. What started as angry posts turned into something bigger. We weren't just sharing frustration anymore, we were building a coalition. Someone started tagging it with a new hashtag. Hashtag respect the work. Not fancy, not market-tested, just raw truth, and it spread like wild grass in dry season. Suddenly, I wasn't alone on the screen. Videos of hard-working people standing in their fields, holding up signs, respect the work, private land isn't your photo shoot, likes don't grow food. Meanwhile, she kept crying on camera, but the cracks started showing. People dug deeper into her past content, finding clips of her mocking store clerks, belittling delivery drivers, laughing about small-town people with their dirty jeans. The mask was slipping. Even the digital mob has a limit, and hypocrisy is usually the line that breaks them. Still, it wasn't enough to undo the damage. My family started getting doxxed, addresses leaked, prank deliveries showing up at all hours, threatening phone calls that didn't care who answered. They came after my niece's school. They vandalized my mailbox. I realized then it wasn't about right or wrong anymore. This was a spectacle. They didn't want justice, they wanted entertainment. They wanted a collapse they could live stream with popcorn and pretend they were fighting for something meaningful. But I didn't collapse. I reinforced. Friends came to help. Trucks from neighboring farms lined up outside my property, not in protest, but in protection. Real men, real women, quiet strength, polite but immovable. No signs. No shouting. Just presence. A silent wall of people who understood that some things you don't let others trample. By the end of the week, her sponsors started backing away. Slowly at first, careful PR statements dripping with neutrality, but it was clear they were distancing themselves. Then one brand buckled completely, pulled all contracts, and issued a quiet apology. Not to me, of course, but to their customers for misjudging the situation. It was cowardly, but I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their respect. What mattered was that the tide was turning, even if it was slow. They wanted me broken, humiliated, apologizing into some shaky camera feed while influencers dissected my every word. Instead, they got a man standing firm in his own dirt, surrounded by others who understood that legacy matters more than algorithms. I didn't start this fight, but I was sure going to finish it. And if they thought Goliath was the worst thing I could unleash, they hadn't yet met a community of quiet people pushed too far, standing shoulder to shoulder, holding the line with nothing but truth and calloused hands. Likes fade. Crops regrow. But dignity, that doesn't break. Not here. It wasn't just the influencers or the online mobs I was fighting anymore. It was the narrative itself. Every camera pointed at me carried its own story, and none of them wanted the truth. They wanted spectacle, headlines that sold rage and fear, not reality. Every clip of me broadcast to the world was another frame in someone else's movie, edited down, stripped of context, twisted to fit the part of the villain. They needed me to be the angry farmer, the backwards relic clinging to land that progress was supposed to sweep away. But I wasn't playing their part. I was writing my own. I didn't need a press team, didn't need a brand, didn't need polished statements approved by committees. What I had was dirt under my fingernails and work that spoke for itself. The people who stood with me didn't gather because of some trending cause. They gathered because they understood what it means to build with your hands and protect what you build. We didn't chant. We didn't argue with strangers online. We just showed up. The influencers couldn't comprehend that. Their world was filters, edits, and comments filtered for positivity. They didn't understand that there's a strength in silence, that a man who's shoveled manure at 4 a.m. isn't afraid of some journalist with a microphone. They thought embarrassment would make me cave, that their followers' hate would make me fold. But embarrassment only works on people desperate for approval. I didn't need theirs. Never wanted it. And that's why they couldn't break me. But things escalated anyway. Petitions started circulating to have me arrested, ridiculous legal claims popping up accusing me of orchestrating a premeditated attack. It was absurd. Any lawyer with a brain could see through it, but this wasn't about legality. It was about pressure, about piling so much on my back that I'd give in, apologize, let them own the story. But the more they pushed, the more I pushed back. And I wasn't pushing alone anymore. Farmers in other states started live streaming their own stories. Ranchers in Australia and Canada joined in. Fishermen along both coasts threw their voices behind us. Bakers, butchers, truckers, regular people who had nothing in common except one thing: they worked. They knew the value of effort, of respect, of boundaries. What started as a story about a bull and a girl running from it turned into something else entirely, a battle between those who build and those who consume without thinking. Even kids started picking up the message. Videos from high schoolers planting gardens, talking about the importance of food, of labor, of how disconnected modern life had become from the very things that kept it alive. Teachers started reaching out, asking if I'd speak to their classes, not because they cared about the influencer drama, but because they saw a teachable moment buried beneath the headlines. Respect, responsibility, consequence. But still, the other side fought back. They called us names, threw around words like backwards, toxic, barbaric. They couldn't see past their own reflections in their phone screens. To them, anyone defending physical work was a relic, an obstacle in the way of the next big viral thing. I stopped reading the messages. I stopped responding. Not because I was defeated, but because I was busy actually living. That's something none of them could take from me. While they raged online, I fixed fences. While they flooded the internet with accusations, I seeded new wheat rows. While they tried to turn my life into a cautionary tale, I was building the next chapter of it with sweat and steady breath. They didn't understand that life keeps going when the cameras are off. Likes don't plant seeds. Retweets don't turn into food. And views don't replace discipline. And then came the part they didn't expect. The influencer herself started fading. Her tears got weaker. Her stories recycled. Even her most loyal followers began turning, not because of me, but because of fatigue. The internet doesn't really love anyone, it just loves something new. Drama has a short shelf life, and once you've milked it dry, the audience drift. New scandals appear. New villains rise. And soon, she was fighting to stay relevant in the same system that once worshipped her. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like truth finally catching up. And truth doesn't always come with applause. It comes with quiet, with the sound of morning birds returning to the fields after storms, with the hum of tractors starting before dawn, with the satisfaction of knowing you didn't bend just because someone told you to. Lawyers started calling me, offering their services for free, saying they'd be happy to help countersue for defamation, for damages. Sponsors who had backed her quietly emailed, trying to soften their stance or spin their apologies into marketing fluff. I ignored most of it. I didn't need their backpedaling. I didn't want their favor. What I wanted was my land respected, my work undisturbed, and my family left alone. The only thing I ever wanted was the right to do what my father did, what his father did, work in peace. Funny how something that simple became an act of rebellion. But that's what it was now, rebellion. Not against progress, not against technology, but against the arrogance that thinks convenience is more important than contribution. The idea that people with followings deserve more respect than people with calluses. They thought I was fighting over a wheat field. What I was really fighting for was the right to exist without someone turning my life into a stage for their ego. Some of the local folks started coming by, shaking my hand, bringing casseroles like it was a funeral, except I wasn't mourning. I was growing. Every handshake wasn't pity, it was solidarity. They weren't apologizing for the noise, they were standing with me against it. And when the cameras finally drifted off to new disasters, I didn't celebrate. I just kept going. The fences needed another round of checking. The harvest was still ahead. Life doesn't pause for drama, and the land sure doesn't care who's trending this week. They thought they could cancel a man by embarrassing him in his own home. But I wasn't embarrassed. I was busy. Busy doing the kind of work that feeds the very people who think they're above it. Busy growing things they'll never understand. Busy living on my terms, in the dirt they mock but secretly need. They say never meet your heroes. Maybe they should add never mock the hands that feed you. And as for Goliath, he went back to chewing, back to his lazy afternoons by the water trough, just another part of the land, unbothered by the noise of a world desperate for constant conflict. That's the thing about beasts, they don't chase attention. They just take what's theirs and move on. So did I. It didn't take long for everything to settle into something close to normal, or at least as close as normal gets after the world's tried to turn your life into a headline. The cameras left first, not with fanfare, but with the quiet shuffle of exhausted crews realizing the next big scandal was elsewhere. The influencers' apologies, if you could call them that, came in weak bursts. Half-hearted, clearly written by some PR manager more worried about contracts than truth. She blamed stress, blamed misunderstanding, blamed the online environment. Blamed everything except herself. I wasn't waiting for her to admit anything. I didn't need her words. Words don't put wheat back on the stalk. Words don't mend fences. Words don't reverse the weeks of insults, death threats, or strangers throwing rocks at my truck on back road. But where she spoke to cameras, I spoke to the land. And the land doesn't require explanation, just effort. So that's what I gave it. Harvest season came, like it always does, indifferent to internet drama, unaffected by influencers or their followers. The rain still mattered. The sun still mattered. The soil, the wind, the machinery, the aching back after long days, they were all real, while the storm of outrage had been smoke, blinding but without substance. I spent those mornings alone mostly, walking the rows, checking for damage, measuring yield, marking where things needed reseeding next season. The familiar rhythms of work returned. No hashtags, no screaming, just quiet, steady living. And then something happened that no one could have predicted. A letter came. Not from one of the haters, not from her, not from any corporation. It came from a small town halfway across the country. Handwritten. Careful script. Inside was a simple message. Thank you for standing up. My father's land was destroyed by a group filming a music video. We couldn't fight them. But you did. And because of you, we found our voice. That letter meant more than any apology the influencer could have posted. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about revenge. It was about someone somewhere realizing they weren't alone anymore. And that was when I realized the storm they tried to unleash on me hadn't broken me. It had built something bigger. Solidarity. People scattered across states, countries, oceans, connected not by algorithms but by respect for work, for property, for dignity. More letters followed. Dozens. Some with similar stories of trespassing and disrespect, others just saying thanks for standing firm when the easy route was to fold and cry for forgiveness. I didn't post them. Didn't make content out of them. I kept them in a box next to the kitchen table. A reminder of what mattered. A reminder that behind the noise, behind the clickbait, there are still people out there who believe in respect, who know what it means to earn something instead of taking it. And it wasn't just letters. Something shifted in the community too. People started asking real questions. Not about drama, not about the influencer, but about the food on their plate. About farming. About work. Young kids who'd never thought about where bread comes from started watching videos about agriculture, not because it was trending, but because they wanted to understand. Schools started inviting local farmers to speak. Journalists wrote pieces. Not about scandal, but about the gap between the online world and the real one. For the first time in a long time, people seemed willing to talk about more than their phones. That's what they don't teach you in media school. Sometimes, the backlash isn't the punishment, it's the beginning of something better. They wanted to destroy me with a mob, but mobs burn out. Real change doesn't happen in screaming matches. It happens when someone plants something and waits for it to grow, knowing full well they might never see the fruit of it. That's the kind of work I understood. But not everyone learned. Another influencer, trying to ride the coattails of the first, came around a few weeks later. Tried to make a scene. Thought she could go viral by being the next victim of the mean old farmer with the bull. But this time, the internet wasn't buying it. The comments turned before she could even get her video uploaded. People had seen enough. They recognized the pattern now. It wasn't about free spirit, wasn't about adventure. It was about entitlement dressed up as bravery. She left quickly, no dramatic exit, no tearful live streams. Just silence. That's the thing about standing your ground. It doesn't just stop the current fight, it sets a standard. And standards have a way of echoing, even in places you'll never visit. It wasn't victory I felt at the end. It wasn't revenge. It was something older, something quieter. Vindication, maybe. Not the kind that comes with headlines, but the kind that comes with standing at the edge of your field, watching the horizon turn orange with dawn, knowing you didn't give up who you were just to please people who wouldn't lift a hand to help you if you broke. The world's going to keep churning. New scandals, new villains, new hashtags. The machines don't stop. But in pockets of quiet, in fields like mine, people still remember that real work matters more than internet noise. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we can really hope for. That, in the spaces between the shouting, someone remembers how things actually grow. And as for Goliath, he stood by the fence line that morning, chewing like he always did, unconcerned, steady, unmoved by the weight of the world trying to break into our quiet life. He wasn't a symbol to me. He wasn't content. He was just a bull, just part of the farm, part of the rhythm of a life that doesn't require anyone else's approval. I didn't need forgiveness from strangers. I didn't need redemption written in pixels. I needed mornings like that, work to be done, land to care for, a life to live on my terms. And in that moment, surrounded by the peace of my own making, I finally understood something simple. They can't cancel what they don't control. And they never controlled me. They never will. Time has a way of sorting things out that no algorithm can match. Weeks turned into months, and what had once been a screaming circus online faded into a whisper. The names of the influencers were already slipping into forgettable corners of the internet, replaced by the next controversy, the next celebrity meltdown, the next outrage designed to keep people distracted. But the land didn't forget. It remembered every footprint, every broken stalk of wheat, every careless intrusion by people who didn't know how to respect boundaries. The scars were there, not just in the bent fence posts, but in the way I carried myself, steady but changed. But change wasn't just on my side of the fence. I started noticing it everywhere. Local businesses began carrying more produce from regional farms, not because of marketing, but because people started asking for it. Parents who had never given a thought to where their food came from started showing up at farmers' markets with their kids in tow, asking questions about wheat, about corn, about the difference between free-range eggs and the ones packed in plastic under supermarket lights. It wasn't some overnight revolution. It was something slower, something honest, something earned. The internet hadn't taught them that. Life did. The very drama that was meant to humiliate me had become the spark for people to realize how disconnected they were from the things that kept them alive. Somewhere along the way, the whole mess stopped being about one influencer and one farmer. It became about something bigger. The divide between living on screens and living with your hand. And yet, not everyone learned the lesson. There were still the stragglers, still the smug online commentators who tried to spin it all as cruelty, still the bloggers who wanted to keep the narrative alive because outrage sells better than resolution. But their words didn't carry weight anymore. Not here. Not in the dirt. Not among people who knew what it was to build something one shovel of earth at a time. Their opinions drifted like smoke over tilled ground, loud, maybe, but powerless to stop the seeds beneath from growing. Funny thing about farming, you don't get immediate result. You don't plant wheat on Monday and bake bread on Friday. You work, you wait, you endure. Maybe that's why they didn't understand me, because their entire world was built around instant gratification, instant fame, instant feedback. I had been living in a different rhythm my whole life, and I wasn't about to give that up for likes. As for me, I didn't talk much about it anymore. I didn't need to. The land spoke loud enough. Harvest came, and with it, a yield that surprised even me, considering the mess I'd been dealing with. Strong, golden rows rolling like waves under the sunrise, more beautiful than any photograph or edited video could ever capture. I didn't smile for cameras. I smiled because of the work. Because of what it meant. Because I hadn't been broken by the weight of someone else's arrogance. Because I had kept going. And it wasn't just work that changed. It was how I saw the people around me. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years came by again, not because of gossip, not because of pity, but because of shared experience. Old grudges that had lingered over land boundaries or equipment disputes suddenly felt small, laughable even, compared to the tidal wave of outsiders thinking they could play God with someone else's life for entertainment. Sometimes it takes a stranger's disrespect to remind you how much you actually respect the folks next door. One day, a local kid about 16 years old came up to me after school, shoes dusty, hands stuffed in his pockets, nervous as all hell. Said he wanted to learn about farming. Not for a school project. Not for a TikTok stunt. Just because. Said he'd seen what had happened to me and figured maybe it was time to learn something real. That one moment meant more to me than any of the outrage or apologies combined. I put him to work. Not with a camera in sight. Just sweat, dirt, and quiet explanations about how the land listens if you're willing to pay attention. Maybe he'll stick with it. Maybe not. But either way, he left that field with more than he came with. calluses on his palms, and the start of understanding something older than screens. The influencer never showed her face here again. I didn't expect her to. She wasn't built for this kind of life, not built for facing people when the story no longer benefits her. She faded into her world, into filtered selfies and pre-written apologies, into the machinery of entertainment that forgets its players as quickly as it elevates them. I wasn't angry at her anymore. Honestly, I felt sorry for her in a way, not because of what she lost, but because of what she never really had. Peace. Purpose. The kind of satisfaction that only comes when you earn something with your own hand. Out here, there are no shortcuts. There's no algorithm that can make crops grow faster, no filter to hide bad harvests, no manager to talk your way out of drought or blight. It's just you, the land, and the choices you make every single day. And somehow, after everything they tried to throw at me, I was still standing. Stronger, even. Not because of revenge, but because of resolve. They tried to define me with headlines. They failed. They tried to shame me with clips taken out of context. They failed. They tried to make me doubt myself with wave after wave of insult. They failed. And they'll fail again the next time they try it on someone else who knows the weight of real work. I don't pretend to be a hero. I'm not a martyr. I'm not some symbol for a movement. I'm just a man who didn't like people trampling his wheat, who happened to have a bull with a temper and a backbone strong enough not to apologize for standing his ground. That's all. No grand speeches. No documentaries. No best-selling memoir. Just work. The same work I've been doing since before any of them knew my name, and the same work I'll be doing long after they've forgotten it. In the end, they didn't get to write my story. I did. With every fence I repaired, with every acre I planted, with every sunrise I greeted while the rest of them scrolled through strangers' arguments in bed, I wrote it. And that's what they'll never understand. Real life doesn't happen on a screen. It happens out here. And out here, I won. Not because I beat them, but because they never mattered in the first place. The quiet after everything settled wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the kind of clarity you only get when you've walked through a storm and come out with your boots still on, dirt on your sleeves but your spine straight. I didn't care much for revenge, didn't care to dance on anyone's downfall. That wasn't my way. I cared about the rows of wheat standing strong again, about the hum of life returning to what it was before strangers started poking around where they didn't belong. And as that calm settled over my land, I found something deeper than satisfaction. I found ownership, not just of the land but of the story itself. They say the internet doesn't forget. That's a lie. It forgets faster than it remembers. By the time one scandal's burning out, another one's on deck. People who had screamed threats at me online were now cheering some other fool's embarrassment, moving on like moths to another flame. Their attention spans didn't stretch as far as the fence line at the edge of my property. But I didn't need their memory. I had my own. I remembered everything, not the insults but the moments when I wanted to stop fighting, when quitting seemed easier than facing that tidal wave of fake outrage. And every time I thought about stopping, I pictured the faces of my grandfather and father before me, standing in the same soil, dealing with storms that didn't come from computers, but from the sky. Men who didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't run. That legacy is why I stayed standing. That's the thing they'll never understand about farmers or about people who work with their hands. Our roots go deeper than their trends. When they mocked me, they weren't just mocking a farmer. They were mocking generations of work, of endurance, of sacrifice. They didn't realize that a person tied to the land isn't standing alone. He's standing with everyone who came before him, everyone who taught him to lift when it hurt, to keep going when it felt pointless, to protect what mattered. Out here, we don't walk away from what's ours. Not for anyone. Especially not for cowards hiding behind usernames. Funny enough, once the internet noise faded, the real world got louder in all the right ways. More schools invited farmers to speak, more farmers started filming their own videos, not to chase clicks but to teach. People wanted to learn again. Real learning, not filtered versions of reality packaged for easy consumption, but the raw truth of where food comes from, how seasons shape survival, how drought and flood write their own stories in the dirt. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about something bigger being born from the ashes of that circus. And it wasn't just the local scene that shifted. I started getting letters from overseas. People who'd never seen a wheat field, never touched soil, never even left their cities, writing to say that something in them had stirred after watching what happened here. They started gardening on balconies, growing herbs in kitchens, teaching their kids that behind every meal was someone who had labored. That was the win. Not claps, not likes, not validation from strangers, but the start of something real in people's homes. I didn't make speeches about it. Didn't become a face for any cause. Just kept farming. Quietly. Let the work speak the loudest. And people began to see that not everything had to be sold as entertainment. Sometimes work was just work, and that alone was noble enough. There were still critics, of course. They never go away fully. Some blogger wrote a think piece months later calling me the face of rural stubbornness, like that was an insult. I laughed when I read it. If being stubborn meant standing up for my land, my work, my dignity, then stubborn I would gladly be. Let the soft-handed commentators write essays about lives they'll never live. Out here, we don't write essays. We write furrows with steel and sweat. Even Goliath became a bit of a local legend, not that he cared. To him, life was the same. Eat, sleep, watch the horizon, keep away the trouble. But to the folks in town, he became a story of his own. Kids would lean over the fence hoping to catch a glimpse, daring each other to stand close as if bravery could be measured by proximity to a bull with a record of chasing influencers off the property. I didn't mind. Let the kids have their stories. Better stories about bulls guarding wheat than endless recycled internet nonsense. One evening, as the sun was dropping behind the hills and painting the whole place in orange and purple, I stood by that fence and thought about what I'd learned. People love a fight, especially one they can watch from a safe distance. But what they respect, even if they don't say it out loud, is someone who doesn't blink, someone who doesn't shift their weight under pressure, someone who doesn't fold when the mob is screaming. Most people don't want to admit they admire that, because it reminds them of what they've compromised in themselves. But deep down they know. And that's what carried me. Not the crowd, not the letters, not even the vindication. It was that simple, quiet truth. I didn't flinch. And that meant I could live with myself no matter how many people tried to twist the story. They could own the headlines. I owned my mornings. I didn't go viral for what I did next. I didn't make a video about the new harvest or stage a victory lap with some brand partnership. I just walked the rows again like I always had, boots pressing down the same earth my family's boots had pressed for generations, breathing the same crisp air that doesn't belong to anyone but those willing to rise early enough to feel it properly. That's what winning looks like. Not fame, not applause, but knowing that you kept your soul intact. That influencer's followers forgot me. But I didn't forget myself. And when it's all said and done, that's the only thing that matters.